our philosophy is to stay involved in these communities, to become members of the chambers of commerce, to go to their ag days at the county fair, to go to the community festival, to continue to organize uh, community meetings, to really educate people about what these projects are. The polling, as Robin was talking about, really shows that when community members stay engaged with the benefits that are coming out of these projects, that they're much more likely to support future development.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by the Clean Power Consulting Group. I'm Tim Montague, your host. You can find all of our content at cleanpower.group. Today on the Clean Power Hour, community engagement. Are we under communicating to the host communities of clean energy facilities? That was a mouthful. We have a wonderful panel of guests today. We have Tyler Duvelius with Conservatives for a Clean Energy Future. We have Jon Carson, who is a solar developer with Trajectory Energy. We have Robin Pressman with Embold Research, and none other but Mike Casey, president of Tigercomm. Welcome, everyone, to the panel.
Thanks for having us, Tim.
Great to
Really
see
excited to dive into this topic of constituent relations. When you build a solar farm or a wind farm, there is a local community. These are landowners. These are farmers who are leasing land and growing crops. These are residents who live in rural communities across the Midwest and across North America. And while I like to say we're swimming in land, we have lots of real estate resources. There is no denying it that solar and wind farms are an impact. They're a visual impact. Sometimes they're more than a visual impact, depending on the type of facility it is. And I often think that I'm very fortunate to work in the solar industry and not the wind industry, because I think wind is a little more difficult to develop. But Mike Casey penned an article about this topic, and Tyler Duvelius has been knee-deep in this with local communities. So why don't we start with you, Tyler? What is hot for this topic for you guys at Conservatives for a Clean Energy Future?
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for having us on today. Really the reason we're here to talk about it is how clean energy developers can continue to win their wins, if you will, at the local level, and to discuss the benefits that their projects are bringing to the communities. Actually, earlier this morning, I just drove back to my hometown of Columbus, Ohio from Indianapolis, Indiana, and anybody who's made that drive will see that 70 when you're first coming into Indiana or leaving Indiana, I suppose, is lined with utility scale solar projects. And one of the things that really struck out to me were billboards on the side of the road talking about the projects and quick 5-second glimpses as you were driving by. Really talking about the value that these projects were bringing. And that's what we try to do at CCEF is to work at the state and local levels of government to ensure that communities understand the benefits that these projects are bringing.
So in general, and I'll throw this out to anybody on the panel, why is community acceptance a growing challenge for clean energy?
Tim, I can maybe start the answer. One of the wonderful things about clean energy scaling is over the last 5 to 7 years, a lot of great commercial execution, product development, project development have dropped costs of wind and solar. So now they're the cheapest forms of energy on the planet. And the good news is that that is accelerating the growth of a positive feedback loop in terms of wind and solar development. One of the few places where costs for renewable energy is going up is winning social license to operate and a local permit to build. And we, as a group, thought this is an interesting situation, and we ought to take a look at why that is, and are there costs? So we took a look at a county, Huron County, Michigan. It's a bellwether county, and went deep on local attitudes toward renewable energy using groundbreaking public opinion research methods. And the findings, I think, hold a lot of lessons learned for renewable energy developers and asset owners.
Yeah, Well, what did you find, I guess? And I don't know if you or Robin or Tyler would like to address that question, but what were the findings from that particular county? It is a unique county in that it is on the lake. Uh, yeah, what did you find out?
Thanks, Tim. So one of the interesting things we discovered was even though there are established projects there, there's an assumption that people understand and know what's going on with the community and what's being brought into the community. And we found that wasn't the case at all. When we started off asking questions using our technology, our online poll technology, we saw that there was a 6-point negative favorability rating for wind. But as we educated people about the tax benefits and the projects that are coming into the county due to this wind project, we saw a significant shift, net 14-point shift to went from -6 to +9. And it was just that amount of information, being able to tell people where the money was coming, how it was benefiting the community, that you saw the support shift, which says that there's a real opportunity here to communicate. There's an under-communication going on. Once the projects are built, there is a need for ongoing communication and education.
And Tim, we've had a reason to look at the programs of a lot of larger developers of both solar and wind utility scale projects. And it's our view that of the dozen or so that are there, a very small number of them are doing anything approaching a full programmatically driven communications effort with the communities that host projects that are already up and running. And in some respects, you think, well, we built it, they accepted it, move on to our next thing. But in our view, under communicating with your host communities, those who are hosting working projects, incurs two costs. First, if you're going to ask a county 50 miles away to consider hosting another project of yours, one of the best validators of you as a local development partner is the experience of a community that's a lot like the one that you're asking to build newly in. And if you can say, hey, this community 4 counties over went through the same process, said yes to us, and they're really pleased with the experience, that's an enormous reassurance to that community. And the second is, anytime there is an absence of communication about a project that was decided with some contention within that community, and you stop, you build it and you go away, the dissatisfied and the NIMBYs are going to fill in the void. And anytime there's a sour taste in the community's mouth because there's an aftermath of public debate within that community, there's a filtering upwards into state capitals and governor's mansions. And it's not helpful when it comes to state policy for our industry. So we lose in two ways when we ghost our host communities.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from you, Jon Carson, because you're developing solar projects of all sizes. These are from, 20 acres to several hundred acres here in Illinois and surrounding states. What has your experience been working with local communities?
Well, first, Tim, thanks for having us all on. And I just want to thank Mike and Robin for this great research in Michigan and encourage everyone in the solar and wind industry to read it, absorb it, and adopt those practices. And Tyler, thank you and your group for the great work that you're doing. This is become the bottleneck for putting the clean energy on the grid that we have to get done in the next couple decades. Technology is improving, financing is improving. A lot of state policymakers are doing their job, but as an industry, we have to get this right at the local level. I can't think of another area where that old saying about all politics is local is more true. At the end of the day, you are working with either local elected officials at the city or county level or an appointed board of zoning board of appeals members who you may be flying into this community to work on a project. You may be in and out, but they're going to be there for years and decades to come. They're going to see those angry neighbors at the grocery store the next weekend. And that is the approach that we've always taken at Trajectory. First, understanding the communities that we're proposing to put a project in, understanding the point of view of the local elected officials, the neighbors, the landowners that we're working with, and devising a thoughtful strategy to make sure that people are reached out to in the right order, in the right way. The goal is not that you're going to make everyone happy. That's just not possible in life in general. But that you've given everyone a chance to learn about the project you're proposing, that you've answered the questions honestly. And, I think that, like that old saying about campgrounds, that you left the area better than you found it, that you've educated people in the community, engaged those stakeholders. Because this particular issue, when it comes to solar and wind, there's a real danger of a tragedy of the commons type of thing. Oftentimes, we're only working in a county one time. There's a special challenge that comes with being the second big project to come into a county, either a challenge or an opportunity, depending on what those folks before you did.
And Tim, if I can just take Jon and Mike's comments just a little further, that's our sister C3 organization is the Conservative Energy Network, and we have a project of that we call the Land and Liberty Coalition that goes and engages directly in these communities that Jon was talking about. And our philosophy is, and obviously industry has different projects that they must move on to and devote time and resources toward. But our philosophy is to stay involved in these communities, to become members of the chambers of commerce, to go to their ag days at the county fair, to go to the community festival, to continue to organize community meetings, to really educate people about what these projects are. The polling, as Robin was talking about, really shows that when community members stay engaged with the benefits that are coming out of these projects, that they're much more likely to support future development. I hate to be a homer here and pick an Ohio case example, but you look at Paulding County, Ohio, where they initially brought wind on back in 2008, 2009, in the height of the Great Recession. And there was a little skepticism at first, but really, they brought the project in out of desperation more than anything else, where they just needed to find a new tax base. And lo and behold, here we are, 10, 12, 13 years later, and they can't get enough. Now they're working with the economic development director in the county to try to carve out enough land to put in one more wind farm, to put in one more solar farm, because they recognize the boon that it has brought. And I think that's a great example of how a community can really latch on as long as they continue to see these positive developments. And that's where our group, really with our work at the state level, but even the local work of Land and Liberty, where we really try to drive home the benefits that these projects continue to bear out, over the years as a project settles into their community.
Well, it's great to hear about your work, Tyler. This long-term approach is critical, and the developers don't always have that luxury because the projects are few and far between. It really depends on their MO. Apex would be a company, Mike, that you would be familiar with. They have one or two projects in Illinois, and then they have projects all over the place elsewhere in Texas and Virginia. And so I think they are one of the companies that does a better job of constituent relations. And then there was a story this week that you put on LinkedIn, Mike, about Hecate Energy in upstate New York, getting some pushback in quite an organized manner. But then they themselves counter-organized, yes, and were able to get a coalition of local residents getting behind the project. There are many goods for the local communities in the form of revenue for school districts, for example. That's certainly the case here in the Midwest. And then, Robin, you had a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I was just going to build, and it actually gets to the point you were making as well, that what we see a lot with our clients at Embold Research, and we talk with them about, is this issue of making sure that all voices are heard. It's not just the loudest voices in the room, right? We've all seen it. The loudest voices continuing to be heard, whether it's through social media or showing up in person or on town hall meetings by Zoom, and by coming in and doing research on the front end so that elected officials can see that there is a much broader base of support for these projects, can really help to pave that way so that the representative voices of the community can be heard, because there is widespread support. We just did another poll recently on solar for Vote Solar in Pennsylvania, and we saw overwhelming support for solar there, both rooftop as well as larger scale. So the support is out there. We just need to make sure that that information is being shared across the board.
Tim, I'll add something. That, if I can, I'll add something.
Mike. Go ahead.
It was interesting when Robin's firm asked Huron County residents, what's the thing you want renewable energy farms to do most? They said the number one answer volunteered was, we want tax revenue going to pay for specific infrastructure. And I personally was surprised by that answer, because I thought that what we would see is income for landowners, in helping Midwestern farmers stay on the land. Because ACPA, formerly OWEA, had made, I thought, a very wise investment in making family farm income the iconic benefit. And I'm not second guessing that choice. I think at the time it was the right decision. But the good news is the industry is providing what Huron County residents most want it to do already, which tells us if you're heavily present, you are providing the benefit they most want you to provide, and yet they're not certain they want more of your activity showing up. That tells us that you're under communicating. Because once we began to name specific pieces of infrastructure, a school stadium, a parking lot, a science lab at a high school, the support flipped, and it flipped very quickly and significantly. And I think that it's important that for us to realize that public communications abhors vacuums. And it is not a one and done job, really ever. It's paint the bridge. And I think if we can get the network of large scale developers and asset owners to think more like Jon's thinking and less like legacy plays, we're going to begin to ease this constraint on renewable energy scaling.
Tim, two thoughts I'd just throw out there. First, it didn't surprise me at all that local property taxes were the most important thing. We absolutely see that on the ground. You know, jobs are great, but they're somebody else's job. Farm rent is great, but half the land out there is owned by some out-of-state absentee landowner, so that isn't necessarily as positive. Everybody benefits from local tax revenues. And we have such opportunity county by county to show that renewables are actually starting to bring in more tax revenue than legacy fossil plants. Here in Illinois, that's the case in county after county. The second thing I'd mention is what I thought that article that you shared, Mike, got so correct is, you know, it talked about this particular fight with Hecate Energy in upstate New York, how long they battled it. It made a point that said, goodness, if this is what we have to do, if this is the work required for 60 megawatts, how are we ever going to get this done? And I'll just keep throwing out analogies till you stop me. I think this is, you know, that classic ounce of prevention is worth maybe 10 pounds of cure. Our approach at Trajectory is we overinvest at the beginning. If you get one of these projects right from the beginning, you're sharing the benefits of past projects, you're doing the early outreach, a smooth process, even though it was maybe more work than you'd normally do at the beginning, is 1/10 the total work of those poor developers in that upstate New York project who've been working on this for 5 years.
Yeah, I've seen this here in my own county of Champaign County, where Baywa has a 200 megawatt, 1,500 acre project. And there were some locals who were conflating solar and wind, first and foremost, claiming that solar farms were going to be noisy, which is absolutely not true. And especially at night when they're completely quiet. But so you have to educate the community about what this is, and most people don't know yet, right? The Midwest is still a green field for solar, not so much for wind. That And I live in a county that has a restrictive wind ordinance where there is hardly any wind. We're surrounded by wind farms on all sides, though. And those counties are benefiting from the revenue that is supporting their school districts, which is so essential. So it is a double edge, and you have to work with your local officials, your zoning officials, and then the residents. But that project was successfully permitted. And now they just have to get a off taker so they can get the darn thing built. It's been languishing for 5 years now. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and review. I wanted to let you know that we are partnered with the Midwest Solar Expo this year. Check it out, midwestsolarexpo.com. You can get a 15% discount with our code, which is CPH15. We will also put that in the show notes, CPH numeral 15. The Midwest Solar Expo is the premier B2B solar and clean energy event in the region. It hosts over 450 clean tech executives from around the country. And it's a lovely event in Minneapolis, June 20th to 22nd. So please check it out. Back to the show. I did want to touch on your methodology, Robin. This is something that you guys specialize in, but what exactly how did you gather this polling information?
Thanks, Tim. So our founder and CEO was one of the first data scientists at PayPal and LinkedIn. And on the heels of the 2016 election, he and a lot of people took a look at polling. It said something here is really fundamentally broken. And pollsters have known this for a long time, right? The continued problem of getting people to respond on phones, and that there are fewer and fewer people who even have landlines to respond to. Pollsters have taken to blending in cell phones and using online panels, and all of those technologies help, but in and of themselves have problems as well. And so we created a proprietary methodology called dynamic online sampling. We serve up ads to people and mix in also cell phone and text to web. And we can make adjustments to who we're targeting on the front end to make sure we're getting that representative sample that we need, so that on the back end, we're not having to overweight the data to make it look like the representative sample that it should. And by doing a better job of targeting it on the front end, we're able to be more accurate. And an interesting side impact is by taking it off phones and taking it to online, it ends up being much more affordable for our clients. It's a less expensive approach, and it really meets people where they are. So we're not trying to reach people while they're trying to get dinner on the table or trying to get the kids to bed and they can't really stop and think. People can start taking our survey, put it aside, come back. We check and monitor. The timestamp of people taking our surveys at 2 a.m. when they can't sleep is actually pretty high. And we also find that you lose that social pressure for people to feel like they're saying the right thing to somebody on the phone. So by, somewhat by themselves being able to answer online, they tend to be a little more honest in their responses. And so overall, in the past few years since we launched in 2017, we've really grown. Change Research is our primary company. And then this past summer, we launched Embold, which is our nonpartisan unit. And that's where I'm involved with, and the work we did here for this project.
Tim, if I can, I'd like to just piggyback on that. We don't have any financial tie to Robin's firm, but I will say that the renewable energy industry should pay attention, because I think that this public opinion measurement method has picked the lock on the door that lies between polling of the past, which is just dismally responsive and really increasingly inaccurate, and the dream scenario of digital observation-based public opinion method. So the the promise in 2016 of Cambridge Analytics is with just a few clicks on Facebook, we could tell lots and lots about people. Now, I went up river, so to speak, on the source of that field of studies called psychometrics, and actually talked to the guy who's the founder of the modern psychometric school. And it's compelling. But the problem is, unless you are going to scrape up a lot of Facebook data you're not supposed to be in possession of, it's not accessible to you. So what's next? What's next is, I think, this dynamic online sampling methodology that Robin's firm's come up with. And why is that useful to renewable energy? Because if we're going to build at scale, we're going to build in rural areas. We're going to build in small communities that are not densely populated. And we need a way to engage people where they're at accurately and affordably, and going into very small communities and getting the sense of how they see the world. I think this methodology is what we've been waiting for.
If I could jump in here, Mike, I couldn't agree more. I do think that polling when it comes to these rural projects is so terribly important. Background on me, I'm originally from a small town called Lebanon, Ohio, which is exactly 10 minutes away from Middletown, Ohio, where J.D. Vance wrote Hillbilly Elegy about, if we remember that book from 2016, 2017. So coming from a small town, I understand that they can be difficult people to get the pulse of, right? We're private people by nature. But I think the genius in this polling is you get insight into what is going to make that community tick, right? And Jon, to your point earlier about an ounce of prevention might be worth 10 pounds of cure, I would posit it might be worth 100 pounds of cure.
Yes.
Because what you look at is maybe having the sign on the football field, right, saying this field was powered by so-and-so company. What that's going to do is not only build goodwill in the immediate and long-term future in that rural community, but what it's going to do is to create a positive narrative around renewable energy, which now as a Republican, I like trickle-down economics, but here we're trickling up, really, if you will, to state and federal lawmakers. And they're going to be hearing from the constituents in these communities and hopefully passing better legislation to help enable and make it easier for developers to continue to develop in their state and even in the United States. I think all too often we see examples on the reverse of this, right? Where a community has a bad example and a legislator who's been around for 10, 15 years and has some sway around the state house, he makes this his pet project to go kill a particular industry or to pass a bad piece of legislation. Well, by investing in communities early on, we can start to beat back some of those tough bills that can really hamper the industry by ensuring the goodwill of folks back home.
So, Tyler, the challenge that I see, though, is that it's such a big country and the distances are vast between projects, especially in these big, wide open Midwestern and Western states. How does an organization like yours, find the manpower and the resources to have a constant presence?
Yeah, appreciate that question, Tim. We have state teams in 21 different states across the country, and when you bring in some other states, we have a presence in 25 different states. So we're in half the states across the country, and you have to be smart about the resources that you use. But we find convenings like state meetings of county commissioners or township trustees, where they're all in one centralized place and they're all talking and they're all going out to dinner together, is a great place to go meet a ton of people that are going to have very, very direct decisions into the future of this industry. Not only that, but we want to be a lot of these communities that we're looking to put renewable energy in are conservative. And so we want to be where conservative thought leaders are. And our organization is very intentional about going to meetings like ALEC, for example, to go talk with state legislators, to talk with local elected officials about the benefits that renewable energy can bring and try to share some of the case studies as well. And at the same time, empowering those communities that have already seen the benefits of wind and solar in particular in their communities, to empower those community leaders to be champions and ambassadors for the industry to their colleagues from around the state, because that that's a huge win when you can start having those conversations.
And
Tim, I'll offer some validation for what Tyler's saying. It is a big country. All places are at least slightly different. But what we know from public opinion research over the last 10 years, as trust in public institutions, private institutions has dropped, what has risen as validation are people like me, communities like me. They don't have to be identical. They need to be sufficiently like me that I can see myself in someone else's example. And I'll just say, when the three of us, Robin, Tyler, and myself, challenged the industry on stage to think about this, what we said was, this problem is going to get solved, both collectively and individually. There's going to be some joint efforts, and they're going to, at best, provide some seed lessons. And then the individual developers are going to need to find their ways to doing this better. And what we do know, however, from a cross-field look is the following. By and large, developers are slow, not early. They're reactive, not proactive. They're distributing information. They're not engaging with people on digital platforms, and their use of digital platforms is undersized to the role that digital platforms are playing in communities. The reason why Robin's research methods are more accurate than legacy polling is because they're happening on people's devices. In pre-pandemic, Americans were spending upwards of 6 hours a day on screens. During the pandemic, that just skyrocketed. So this is a nation that starts its decision-making on anything really above an impulse purchase on a device. And the challenge we have now with the collapse of local news media, I think we have 1,300 what we call news deserts in America. These are communities that have no local news media to speak of. Facebook has filled the void. So as a developer, if you're saying, I really don't need to worry about where I build, I just need to get my next permit, I'm going to posit that you're leaving benefit on the table, and it's quite cost-effective benefit.
Yeah, I would argue that while you may not be able to set up a physical visitor center for every solar or wind project, a virtual visitor center is a fantastic idea. And, I will call out Apex on this front. They are very good at constituent relations and making their projects accessible before, during, and after permitting and construction. And that's one of the complaints that communities have, is that the developers are fly by night in a way, right? They're your best friend until everything is buttoned up, and then they're gone. And so that, as Robin pointed out, it's a new world. We're all on screen. We're all on Zoom, virtual meetings. We're all on social media, and these can be used in a positive way to get ahead of the game and do effective community outreach and consistent engagement. You have to have somebody on the other line. The robots are not good enough yet. So don't man that Facebook page with a robot. Man it with a real human being, and they won't know the answers to all the questions, but their colleagues will. So let's spend the last few minutes together talking about what advice we all have for solar, wind, and storage developers, though, because I think folks like Jon Carson have witnessed firsthand the good, bad, and ugly of permitting solar projects. What do you have to share with the community, so to speak, Jon?
I think every county that you're in, every zoning permit that you're going after, operate as though you have to be back there in 6 months asking for the same thing again. I think if more of us took that approach, we'd be benefiting from each other's work. Another piece is hire locally. One thing we've done at Trajectory is we have staff on board in Southern Illinois who live in those communities, Central Illinois, Northern Illinois. And there's just nothing like hearing it from someone who does actually live in that community, who is part of this. And then finally, what I really loved about Robin and Mike's research is just pointing out how these specific things in addition to taxes, can make a big difference. Pointing out that funding for an extra park area in town for a specific road, those are all things we can add to the budgets of our projects. One thing we're starting to experiment with our utility scale work is pairing it with community solar. One question we often get with utility scale projects is, well, aren't you just shipping all that energy to Chicago or New York or wherever? When you're able to talk about this combination of the benefits it will bring on utility savings to local people, we found that makes a huge difference. So all of us, the amount of more solar and wind we have to put in the ground is daunting, and we've all got to be doing the best job possible in these communities that we're in.
Jim, one of the things we've been advocating is what we call the 1% proposal. So take your total construction cost of a project. Let's say you spent $150 million on it. Take 1.5 million, or even, heck, you do 150,000, and invest it in ongoing community engagement on an annual basis, and it'll at least have the following characteristics. You should have a visitor center. It could be a double-wide trailer, and you should have a tour guide who's local, on mission, trained, and scripted, who doesn't just take the tour requests that are incoming, but actually solicits tours to student groups, senior citizens, etc. Number 3, there needs to be after-tour contact with the people who've come through. Once someone's come through, visited, presumably been impressed, you got to stay in touch with them, because you want to begin to stay in touch and know their thinking. 4th, take that opinion you're growing and measure its growth. And 5th, and this is super critical, show local elected officials that support for the project is real and it's growing. So you become iconic. I don't know if any of your listeners are from the state of West Virginia, but if you are, most of them probably don't know that you can get a state-issued license plate saying you're an oil and gas supporter. If you could take your graduating high school senior, and he or she can apply to West Virginia Wesleyan University for a full ride to become a fracking tech. You can also go to the Early Oil and Gas Museum in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and you can go to the annual Oil and Gas Festival. Now, none of our companies, probably outside of Nextera, have the resources to compete with that level of infrastructure investment, but none of our companies have an excuse not to do the obvious basics that we're talking about, because the cost of inaction is growing and it's already steep.
What about you, Tyler? What do you have to say to wind and solar developers?
I would drive home, I think, some of the points Jon made about talk about what this is going to do for the community at all levels, right? It's going to mean more people in the mom and pop restaurants on Main Street. It's going to mean more people in the local hotel as folks are developing, although I would encourage using local labor as much as possible, certainly. But talking about things that we all agree on that are going to benefit from these projects. One of the things that, I really was encouraged to hear from President Biden's State of the Union a couple weeks ago was this unity agenda, I think he called it, where he talks about ending the opioid epidemic, improving mental health services, and improving veteran services, and particularly veteran health services that are available. Talk about how the increased tax revenue that's going to be coming into community can help do those types of things. Remember that you're working in a lot of times in conservative communities where they don't want to defund the police. They want to fund the police. Talk about that. Talk about how you can get a new officer on the street, and what your investment in the community, what is going to be returned to the constituents that are actually going to continue to live there for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I think that it's encouraging to see when things are done well, like, Warren County, Indiana, for example, where there was just good early education, there was buy-in. You see the solar projects elsewhere in Indiana. What did that culminate in? It culminated with Governor Holcomb, who's a Republican from Indiana, talking about the solar industry in his State of the State address. And I think that's how we can start to kind of break down some of these barriers, is when we recognize that this industry truly elevates the communities that they work in. Not only is it going to encourage support in those communities in particular, but it's going to make other communities jealous and want to get in on this development as well.
I'm glad you mentioned Indiana. Doral, I think it's Doral Solar or Doral Energy, is developing a very large project called Mammoth Solar in Indiana. This is a 13,000 acre solar farm. It crosses several counties, and they've created a lovely promotional video where they're interviewing landowners and local stakeholders, and it's just a great example of what is possible. Obviously, it's a very big project, very big investment, and you're not going to make a video perhaps on every community solar project you're developing, but if you're developing tens of megawatts or hundreds of megawatts, certainly you want to do things like a short video that people can easily consume. I mean, it really gives you such a warm and fuzzy about this project, even though it is massive. Solar is very light on the land, and once local residents start to understand that this is actually good for the environment and good for the landowner, for the longevity of the community. Rural communities are struggling in America. People don't want to stay there. They're migrating to the cities where the jobs are. And so renewable energy is a lifeline for these communities in many ways. Any closing thoughts, Robin and Mike?
I might add, thanks, Tim, just to echo what Jon and Tyler were saying a few minutes ago and we've covered, but it's really not to let those loudest voices dictate what's going on. And using public opinion survey research, we can really use that as a tool to represent the community as a whole and share that with elected officials and community leaders so that they understand what is at stake and what the opportunities are for their communities to continue to grow and to benefit. And so this is a tool that can be used for that purposes.
Very good. We will put links to all of your websites in the show notes and links to the 2 articles that Mike has been so kind to bring to our attention. Is there anything we did not talk about that anybody wants to bring up in the last few minutes?
Tim, I'll just say that I think in life, you often face problems for which there isn't an affordable, clear solution. Or there's a clear solution, but it's massive and it's daunting and it's a real question mark how you'll ever get up that mountain. This is not one of those. We have a problem. It is coming with a heavy cost. And for a fraction of that cost, we can solve this problem. It's not an overnight. It's not a light switch, but it is definitely something we can chip away at a pretty good clip. And if we up our community acceptance game across the industry, we're going to be doing ourselves and this country an enormous favor in our push to get us energy independent in a sustainable way.
Well said. Well, with that, I think I will conclude the panel. Thank you all so much. Jon Carson, Tyler Duvelius, Robin Pressman, and Mike Casey. Really good to have you here. I'm Tim Montague. You can find all of our content at the Clean Power Hour at cleanpower.group/podcast. Please give us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. That's how more people will find this. With that, have a great day, everybody. Let's grow solar and storage.
Thanks,
Tim. Take care.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.